So good afternoon. Thanks very much for coming back. I would like now to start the second session of this symposium. The second session is Expert Intervention 1. And my name is Takahiro Sayama. I'm one of the moderator of this session. And this session is about learning from experiences and identifying challenges. And under the framework of UNESCO UNITWIN, University Training and Network Program of UNESCO, launched in 1992, UNESCO chairs are established within universities. They aim at promoting inter-university cooperation and networking to enhance institutional capacities through knowledge sharing and collaborative work. The chair system provides a platform where professors and students learn together to jointly produce new ideas and methods for sustainable development. In order to achieve the goal, WENDI will develop and promote interdisciplinary knowledge for each issue elaborated during the previous session. This session will explore various programs, activities, or specific projects taken up by UNESCO and UNESCO chairs and centers in other countries. Without further delay, I'm pleased to invite guest of honors, Dr. Peter Wells, for the first speaker of this session. He's the Chief Higher Education UNESCO Headquarters, France. So welcome to Dr. Peter Wells.
Thank you very much indeed. And good afternoon, konnichiwa. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. It's a great honor to be here. And I do pass on the congratulations of our Assistant Director General for Education, Stefania Granini, who unfortunately was not able to be here today, but is also following very closely the work on the UNESCO chairs and also this inaugural event. I have a PowerPoint presentation here which I'm almost loath to use, to be honest, because it's rather long-winded. But what I wanted to do was to give you a little bit of an idea, a bit of a flavor for what it is that UNESCO is currently working on, not only within the context of the UNESCO chairs, but the rest of the Education 2030 agenda, and particularly the Sustainable Development Goals. Next. Just to give a little bit of a background to where we are and how we came to be here, from the post-2015 agenda, you will probably be aware that up until 2015, most of the United Nations work centered around the Education for All and the Millennium Development Goals, which were more or less successful in terms of certainly the number of children in school up until the age of 15 certainly increased worldwide. The 2009 World Conference, the second World Conference on Higher Education, which took place during the Millennium and Development Goals period, really put the focus on higher education as a public good and a matter of public responsibility. And this was really one of the key areas for higher education, certainly for the first half of the first decade of the new millennium. Then we had the Incheon Declaration, which was the forerunner to the Sustainable Development Goals, which really put the emphasis now on including equitable access to quality higher education. And this then served as the basis for developing the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which seeks for all member states, all United Nations member states, to ensure inclusive and quality education for all and to promote lifelong learning. And it really was quite a turning point for the world of higher education, because prior to this, like I say, the emphasis had really been on primary and secondary education. But with the relative success of increasing numbers of students graduating through secondary school, member states became more interested and more alert to what was going on in the tertiary sector and the higher education sector. Increasing numbers of students doesn't mean to say necessarily increasing number of qualified, skilled graduates. And higher education does matter now. We are witnessing a huge surge globally in the numbers of, we are witnessing globally a huge surge in the number of students wanting to enroll in higher education institutions. Emerging economies will have around 63 million more students in 2025, and that's expected to double even further. And what we don't really know is how many students are enrolled in online courses. This data is very difficult to collect. We're talking here about your traditional on-campus, not necessarily online students. And I mentioned before the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure you're all familiar with these. The introduction there mentioned about the UNESCO Chairs, and I will come to that again later. But in terms of higher education institutions and their teaching, their learning and research, this is the research agenda, and I will come back to that. I mentioned SDG 4. Of course, UNESCO is responsible for education, science and culture. So for us in the education sector of UNESCO, SDG 4, particularly targets 4.3 and 4.7, are our mandate for this, for the Education 2030 agenda, and particularly the emphasis on lifelong learning opportunities. I think there's a lot of talk about lifelong learning, but not too many people really understand what the implication is for lifelong learning. What we mean by that, and I will come back to this, but what we mean by that in the higher education sense is this: that universities or higher education institutions are not just catering for bachelor's, master's, doctorate students that come in after high school, take their 3 or their one of the 2-3 cycle degree programs and then leave and never come back. We are talking here about new types of learners coming into higher education at different points in the life cycle. Students or people who never attended higher education, but now they're 45 and they want to do. We're talking here about somebody who graduated 25 years ago and now they need to retrain, reskill, upskill, coming back in to higher education institutions. And also not just solely to take full degree programs. Now, when I mention this in many parts of the world, particularly if I'm in with rectors' conferences, I get sort of very bad stares and vibes coming at me. But I'm saying, I'm not suggesting that it's the end of the degree, either a first, second or third level degree. What I am saying is that I don't necessarily need a degree later in life. If my job, where I work now, requires me to learn Chinese, I don't need to take a 4-year bachelor's program in Chinese. But I do need to take a course in conversation or cultural background or courses. And these courses are already actually built into degree programs in many institutions, I hope. So it's only a matter of unpicking them and providing them in a different format for a different type of learner, possibly in a different delivery mode. So that's an aside on lifelong learning. And this is kind of summarizes what I just said in a way. It's talking about innovative higher education as an essential direction for the 2030 roadmap. We're looking for responsive study programs and curricula that provide graduates with the skills and competencies demanded of the modern labour market. We're looking for institutional research that adds value to national, regional and global development aspirations. And this is where the UNESCO Chairs Programme really becomes more important and vital. we're looking now at a diversity of institutions that caters for a new generation of non-traditional learners. In fact, and I would argue that there's no such thing now as a traditional learner. They're all non-traditional. We're looking, of course, for systems of institutions which embrace the use of technologies to expand access via distance learning platforms and different learning enhanced experiences. This is part of the SDG 4. When we are looking to increase access, increasing access, it has to be via the use of technologies. We cannot, member states around the world are not in a position to build more institutions. The institutions themselves are already to capacity. What we need to do is find innovative ways for learners to be able to access information. And also, finally, it's about quality. Numbers don't necessarily mean quality, and that's another key area that we work on now, is ensuring quality enhancement or quality assurance of higher education provision. I like this quote from the former president of the IAU, because what he is talking about really is, again, this relates to the work of the UNESCO Chairs. The SDGs in their entirety provide an opportunity for research that really counts, research that matters, research that can be applied. And I also, I was at this event where Abaisha mentioned this. It's about closing the innovation gap. We also have a problem, of course, with this worldwide. The technology gap, the innovation gap is different in different regions of the world. So this is one of the areas that we're trying to work very closely with member states, and the UNESCO Chairs really is helping to do that, because it's the partnership angle, the South-South, the North-South, South-South cooperation between institutions and researchers, which is really helping globally to address the problems around the SDGs. We heard already that we have more than 700, I think it's more like 750 UNESCO chairs now in 128 countries. This is a bit of a snapshot breakdown as to what where they are. This is by sector, which means within UNESCO: science, education, social science, culture, communications and information. And this is by region. UNESCO is broken down into the 5 regions. So you can see where the vast majority of the chairs are. Often that's linked to the number of institutions. But we are trying to, particularly for Africa and the Arab states, we're trying to increase the number of chairs and the networks, and certainly the partnerships that we can we bring into that work. I mentioned earlier about the number of students, which is exploding around the world. I also mentioned this data, by the way, is provided from UNESCO's Institute for Statistics. It is not an exact science. We rely a lot on data, of course, being provided by member states, but it's undeniable the number of students around the world is increasing. Despite even drops in demographic changes, we are still seeing a lot of change, a lot of students, different types of students. What's more interesting than that, and this is one of our key areas of work, is that we are seeing now more and more students choosing to study abroad. Again, not necessarily for an entire degree program. Maybe it's a semester, it could be 2 semesters, it could be, could even be like 2 years. But also full degree programs. And interestingly, this is partly driven by the labour market. It's partly driven by the skills demanded of the labour market to be interculturally, not only to be cognitively intelligent, and but also to be culturally intelligent. And this is something the labour market is looking for. So we see here 1 in every 40 students studying abroad globally easily will double. Again, difficult to pinpoint, however. If I am in Paris and I'm studying online at Kyoto, what am I? Am I studying abroad? Who knows that? So does the French government know that I am actually effectively studying abroad? And so the data collection mechanisms we have to work on. We do have some figures of the numbers of students studying abroad. So we have some global population of mobile students, and we also have some data on the mobility within regions. As you can see, Asia is at the top. There's more mobility in Asia and the Pacific is the region that we have, than elsewhere, but it's increasing. It is increasing because there's a demand for that. Like I say, not necessarily for full degree programs. I don't have the data here, but certainly I think the vast majority of this mobility is at the master's level. Tends to be more the master's and research levels than the undergraduate courses. But that's also changing, particularly in Europe. The way that UNESCO is helping to support this academic exchange, academic mobility, is via our normative instruments, the UNESCO Conventions on the Recognition of Higher Education. And I will give some more details, but basically what these do is they ensure that students, learners, even faculty get the credit for what they study abroad when they return back to their home country, their home institution, or if they go to a third country. So it's the mobility and the recognition that they studied for 2 semesters, Economics 101 at Kyoto. Now they want to enroll at Sorbonne. They should be able to be presenting that period of study and get some recognition for it. The conventions don't prescribe exactly what the recognition will be. It's more about there being a fair and transparent process in place to be able to assess prior full study programs. So we have we have 5 regional conventions, one for, like I say, Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe and North America, Arab states, Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a recommendation, which is a lesser tool on the recognition of studies, which dates from '93, and we are now currently working on a new global convention on recognition of higher education qualifications, which will be, and I will say something a little bit about this in a moment, the first United Nations Convention on Higher Education. I'll spare you the details here, but this is the background to the original 5 regional conventions from 1974 through to 1983. Now clearly, that's a long time ago. I've just been talking about lifelong learning, different types of delivery modalities, different types of institutions, online learning, cross-border learning, open learning, distance learning, baby bachelors, micromasters. A lot of the world of higher education has changed. So we needed to update these conventions. These are some of the other reasons why. We've got increased internationalization of higher education. We've got mobility both inter and intra-regional. There are changes in the way we look at learning in higher education. There's more focus on quality assurance and qualifications frameworks, for example. And the move to build regional higher education areas. So it's a new international horizon. And this prompted us to then prepare what we call the second generation of regional conventions, beginning in 1997 with the Lisbon Convention for Europe and North America. Then a good time later actually, the Tokyo Convention, which was adopted in 2011 for the Asia Pacific region, which we are very pleased finally entered into force this February 2018, and the first convention committee meeting will take place in Seoul this October, which is a landmark step for this region. Same applies for Africa. We revised the old Arusha Convention, and we now have the Addis Convention. I just came back last month from Cordoba in Argentina, and we now have a new Latin American and Caribbean Convention. And in March, we revised in Morocco the Arab States Convention. So the last two need to be adopted formally, but by April next year, we will have 5 revised regional conventions. And what's very interesting about this is how important it is to member states. It's important to governments. It's important to policymakers because they want to internationalize their higher education systems. They want to have international students. They want to have international faculty exchange, which is great. But at the same time, you need to be able to have systems in place to recognize incoming students, prior qualifications and prior learning, informal, formal. I won't go down that road because that's a whole new conference. But it's been very encouraging how important the member states see this work. I'll skip this. This is some of the more detailed aspects as to what the changes are within the new conventions, what they really address that were not addressed necessarily before. But one thing it does, I will point out, it says the importance of access to reliable information. You can't recognize qualifications if you have no information about who issued them. Where is this institution? Is it an established institution? Is it recognized by the local authorities or the government, the competent authorities? Is it quality assured? Does the country have a quality assurance mechanism in place, a system in place? Without all of this information, how can I possibly make an assessment of a qualification? And I'm always horrified when I speak to a minister or deputy minister and I say, how many institutions have you got? Higher education institutions, and they go, not really sure. If you're not really sure how many institutions you've got, then how do you know they are being quality assured and the quality of teaching and learning and research, graduate competences is actually helping the development of your country? So reliable information provided by the competent authorities is vital to the recognition process. That's one of the key differences in the new conventions. Of course, the conventions are also underpinned by quality assurance, like I just said. If there's no quality assurance systems in place, then I'm not confident in the quality of the qualification I'm looking at. So this is actually one of the key drivers for member states and the conventions is that it's a normative instrument that puts in place procedures for or obligations for putting in procedures for quality assuring higher education institutions and systems. So that's the foundations on which recognition is built. I mentioned about the Global Convention. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail. But right now, the vast majority of mobility of an exchange between faculties and researchers and students is within the regions. That's still the case. However, we are seeing more and more inter-regional mobility. There are more people from Asia and Pacific deciding to go study in Europe or Latin America or North America. And same with Latin America. There are more people coming into Europe. So what we were called upon by member states was to put, if you like, an umbrella or a roof convention over the 5. The 5 state conventions will remain because there are certain specific differences in each region that we want to maintain. But we need a global umbrella. It's a bit like the UNESCO house. We've got the 5 pillars, but we need a house, so a roof over the top. To facilitate inter-regional mobility. Because right now, legally, technically, if I have a degree from the University of Sao Paulo and I want to go and study in Kyoto, Tokyo Convention will not necessarily give me the rights to have that qualification evaluated. Certainly my right to appeal the decision is not there, just by legal definition of the scope of the regional conventions. And we're seeing more and more of that. So this is in preparation. We hope to have this adopted next at the General Conference in 2019, next year. I mentioned a little bit about this already. There is more than recognition at stake though here. We're talking about promoting international cooperation in research, teaching and learning, curriculum design, program design. Again, and this is what the work of the UNESCO Chairs is really underpins and really helps to enhance that cooperation. I've only got 2 slides left now. I mentioned very early on about the 2nd World Conference on Higher Education. We are now looking for the 3rd World Conference on Higher Education, which actually, unfortunately, just before I came away, we've moved the date now. It's not 2020, it's 2021. I put there, we're calling it hashtag Higher Education Blue Sky Thinking. And I want to leave this kind of with you. We are still in the early stages of planning this, but when I talk about it, I say I like to say, put it like this: if a university didn't exist, if it had never been invented, but we wanted to do something for people after secondary, what would we do? We had to invent it today. What would it look like? Where would it be? Who would it be for? What would we teach? What would we research? How would we do this? So it's really thinking about the new type of learner in a new type of environment. Bricks and mortar, we don't need bricks and mortar. So this is the blue sky thinking, and that's kind of going to be the main thrust, I suppose, or the main concept of the World Conference 2021. To help us make sense of the world we live in. And I don't know if you've read The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. It was only not even 13 years ago when he says that when I wrote The World is Flat, which I really recommend you read, it's a great book, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter was a sound, the cloud was in the sky, 4G was a parking place, LinkedIn was a prison, applications were what you sent to college, and Skype, for most people, was a typo. So with that, I will leave that there, and I look forward to the discussions this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.